Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. Welcome. I am excited to have in the studio Tracey DeFrancesco, who is the Executive Director of the AMARC Foundation. Welcome, Tracy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And we have asked you here today because you are in the lucky position of celebrating investigative journalism with cold, hard cash. So, and with an intro like that, I feel like we have to delve into the prize, and then we'll take a step back and talk about the foundation. So, tell us a little bit about the AMARC Prize for Investigative Reporting, which is sweeping the nation.
Yeah, we are making a good march across the nation, and I would say, the worst part of my job is getting the contracts in place to set up the AMARC prizes, and then after that, I get to give away money, which is really fun.
Yes.
Feel like Santa Claus sometimes handing out all this money, but it's for a great cause. So the AMARC prizes started with the Los Angeles Press Club in 2023. And they conceived of it as the AMARC Prize for reporting on misinformation and disinformation. And that's how they ran the award in 2023 and 2024. It started with their Southern California Journalism Awards. And we were lucky to have such a great press club to start off with. They, know what they're doing with awards. They have a great program there and a great executive director running the press club. So we took a lot of our cues from them and how we set up the award. The goal was really to reward excellent journalism. In 2024, my board looked at what we were doing with our different programs and grants that we were giving, and they said, what we love is the AMARC Prize. Let's expand this. Let's take it nationwide, take it from Southern California to the entire state of California. And they gave me the mandate, go out and find a press club or press association in every state that can run the AMARC Prize. We decided to expand it to be a focus on investigative journalism as opposed to just mis and disinformation. We thought that was kind of a broader category, and it's something that the foundation has really decided to focus its resources on promoting. So our goal for this award was to reward the best investigative journalism in each state. And then when we started talking to other press groups, it was Michael Koretsky at SPJ Florida who said, if you want to incentivize more investigative reporting, you ought to give some prize money to the outlets too. And we thought that was a great idea. And at that point, we expanded the prize money by $5,000 to give some money to the outlets that publish the winning pieces. So now in each state, it's a total prize package of $15,000. So the first place reporters get $5,000 and their outlets get $2,500. The second place gets $3,000 for the reporter and $1,500 for the outlet. And then third place is $2,000 for the reporter and $1,000 for the outlet. And we have gotten amazing feedback on this first year of our expansion. In 2025, we awarded AMARC prizes in 30 states. So that's 90 winners total. And we are expanding to, it is. And we'll be in 42 states in 2026 and hoping to get to all 50 states. We've got DC through you, and then we're still looking for Puerto Rico as well.
Okay. Well, and those are good. Those are squad goals right there. So let's just take a moment and repeat that. So for your goal is for every state in the United States plus Puerto Rico, and DC. Just RIP taxation without representation. So I just want to acknowledge that. For each jurisdiction, you're giving away $15,000 in prize money for investigative reporting. And so each jurisdiction has its own press association or press club that might have slightly differing rules and contest pieces, but that's a huge, huge investment. So tell me why the AMARC Foundation feels so strongly about investigative journalism.
Yeah, well, I'll take you back to our founding in 1997. We were founded by a businessman named Stephen C. Markoff. He is a businessman, a philanthropist, an author, an adventure traveler, just a really impressive, intelligent, and curious person. He has long had a passion for disseminating nonpartisan, unbiased information. So, for many years in its existence, AMARC didn't have a formal staff or formal operations. He would commission reports on different social and political issues. Those are still on our website, the reports that were developed over the years. And he wanted that information to be available to people. He also funded other organizations and people. A lot of the foundation's funding went to procon.org, which does the pros and cons of controversial issues. That was
Hmm.
used by over 20 million people a year in its heyday. It's now being run by Encyclopedia Britannica. So he
Hmm.
always had this goal for the foundation. It's named after him, Stephen Markoff, and then AMARC. It's his legacy, and he just really wanted to be in the business of educating people, providing information. And in 2022, we brought on a CEO to help us kind of find our focus and figure out what we could do with the endowment that we've gotten from Steve Markoff. And he had a background in journalism, and he's the one who set us on the path to the AMARC prizes. So when he was leaving in 2024, the board looked at the reports that we were doing, which are great, and we were doing some nonprofit journalism grants, and we were, trying to kind of dip our toes into different things. And what they said was those AMARC prizes is really where we want to be focusing our energy. So that's how we got on this path, to trying to figure out, how can we give an award for the best reporting in each state.
Hmm. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because what you're doing, and this, your founder Stephen felt like providing the information sort of in a neutral way, in a fact-based, reporting way is going to get the biggest, I guess, bang for the buck, or the most impact. And although reports that are used as source materials are very helpful, they're not really reaching individuals in the way that I think journalism sort of cuts directly into what's happening in a community, especially if you're looking at local journalism.
Yeah, you nailed it exactly. If we had 1,000 people see a report on our website in a month, that was, high traffic for us. So it just wasn't a good use of resources to keep doing these reports, as much as they had great, data visualization and solid research behind them. And we kind of thought, there are news outlets with these deep benches of journalists with expertise on these issues. And as we learn more and more about investigative reporting and how much work goes into it, the persistence, the resources, the credibility you have to build with the sources to get the information, and just how much of a public service it is to uncover these things that need to be seen and known about. It just seemed like the best way to kind of use the resources that we have, to kind of enact some change.
Hmm. Well, and I think also when you look at investigative journalism, you're either dealing with someone who's doing a passion project, so going really deep on one topic, kind of to the exclusion of all else, or you are dealing with a newsroom that has the capacity to kind of take someone off the daily grind or lessen their daily grind in order to allocate resources to the investigation. And as news media changes, you know, really highlighting that work with financial support is critical. And $15,000 is a lot of money. And I love that you've done it so that it goes to the journalist and to the outlet, because, you need both in that way. So you were in, so 30 states in 2025, and we're recording this at the end of 2025. So you're looking out into your bright frontier with 23 more jurisdictions to go, I guess. Um, what what has the effect been? What have you seen?
Um, as we got towards the end of the year, we wanted to think about how do we measure the impact of this
Mhm,
funding? It sounds good. We know we all feel good about supporting journalism. We know that journalism needs resources, but is what we're doing making a difference? Because one thing you hear immediately is money's great, but no one
mhm,
is doing investigative journalism to get rich. They're not doing it for the awards. They're not doing it for the accolades. That's just kind of a nice bonus. But what we found, in surveying the winners, we emailed between, the shared bylines and everything for our 90 winners, we had just over 150 reporters who were
Great.
recognized with an AMARC prize this year.
Because it's a first, second, and third place.
First, second, and
Yeah.
third, and then, 2, 3, 4 people sometimes working on an article. So we emailed them. We heard back from about a third of them, and we asked them, did your investigative piece lead to any concrete changes? Did winning the prize have any impact on you? And we asked, how did your win affect your outlet and how it prioritizes or supports investigative work? And the feedback that we got just blew us away. We're currently compiling a report that we can put on our website in 2026 to share this information, because we found that the investigative work had a huge difference, meaningful, impactful changes in legal and administrative action, in increased public awareness and discourse, and accountability and institutional change. So whether it was, how seniors are being treated, scams perpetrated against seniors, how hospitals are handling billing, or if patients are being treated correctly, court cases, police overreach. There was just such a wide variety of topics, but the overall theme was that this reporting led to outrage in the legislatures and new laws being passed and changes in policies and people being held to account. There was one state where a winning piece was about someone who had abused students in the 80s, and finally just now in 2025, had some accountability in getting fired from his current job. So just these stories that are just making such a big difference in the world. And then we also found that it had a really good impact on the reporters who won. As they said, that's not why they do it. But, we heard from people who said, I didn't realize how badly I needed to be told that what I do matters and to be recognized for it. It was such a morale boost. It was validating for what they're doing. There's people who are on the verge of burnout, and they said, this money covered my childcare costs for several months, or it was more of a raise than I've gotten from the newsroom in many years, and it helped me pay bills. There's people who talked about how they worked on this story and missed anniversaries, and now they can go on their anniversary trip. So it just it was such a great way to see the impact of not only the winning reporting but also winning the prize, and how it kind of reaffirmed them and reinvigorated them, and we're hoping that that it'll just keep strengthening the resolve of the people who do this important work.
Absolutely. And I think also we talk a lot about investigative journalism and bringing stories to light and allowing people to feel seen and heard, but that's also important for the journalist behind the story. And sometimes we don't take that into account. And so I think in a real, tangible way, the prize lifts up that journalist to say what you do matters, but it also makes a material difference in their life in whatever way it can. So fabulous. And we are, in Maryland, Delaware, and DC, we are in our first cycle. So for those of you listening, the Investigative Reporting Prize, some rules here in our jurisdictions. The work has to be published within Maryland, Delaware, or the District of Columbia within the calendar year of 2025. You can go to the mddcpress.com website and look for our contest. Our contest is open until January 31st. You and entrance to the AMARC prize, simply enter our investigative reporting category and you're automatically considered for the AMARC prize. And one of the things that we like to do, sort of in that vein of raising up the work that our journalists are doing, we usually bring some of our investigative reporting winners on the podcast to talk to them about the work that they've done. And it's fascinating to hear sort of that story behind the story, and how those investigations really are built piece by piece, and just the amount of time that it takes. Even the simplest sort of story. Remember, maybe last year or the year before, we had an investigation where in Delaware about the use of tablets in prisons, and how that was an area that's ripe for abuse. And so but understanding sort of that seems like a very straightforward story, but there's a lot that goes into it and a lot of work that needs to be done. Are you seeing in the states that have had this prize for a couple years, are you seeing more entries into investigative reporting? Are you seeing more things happen, or maybe different types of things uncovered?
This was the first year of our expansion beyond the Los Angeles Press Club, but we did ask all of the states that hosted an AMARC prize this year to kind of estimate the entries versus other categories or previous years in their investigative categories. And overwhelmingly, we heard feedback that having this cash prize really reinvigorated their contest. It got people excited. I heard some feedback that there were veteran journalists who maybe had gotten jaded or
Hmm.
not bothering to enter awards anymore. There were some states where they said their major press outlets hadn't been entering the contest for a while, but now with the AMARC prize, they did enter. So having the cash prize lifted up the whole contest, and overall entries increased, and entries for the AMARC prize increased over past years for just regular investigative categories.
Oh, that's terrific. So
Yeah.
I want to look a little bit more broadly at the AMARC Foundation, because although this is probably your showiest program, it's not your only program. So tell us a little bit more about what the foundation's other work entails.
Yeah, the AMARC prizes were definitely our flagship initiative, and we have this year launched two additional programs. So that are funded by my board and approved by the board of directors. We started looking at the life cycle of a journalist and thinking about
Hmm.
how can we support journalists at different phases in their careers. The AMARC Prize is definitely kind of a mid-career professional award, although we did have some new reporters win in some states that were very
Oh,
excited to
that's
kind of start
great.
their careers off with the win. And so when looking at that, we said, okay, what can we do to help feed the pipeline of future journalists and
Hmm.
reporters? So we established two new programs. At the beginning of 2025, we started our AMARC Foundation Journalism Masters Scholarships. So that
Hmm.
is a $10,000 scholarship for a student who is in a master's in journalism program. We have 23 schools participating at the moment, and we're looking to continue growing that. We still have a lot of conversations in progress. So that's 23 students this year that will get $10,000 to spend it any way they want towards their tuition, towards their housing, equipment, whatever they need. Just trying to help them at this point in their education and help them to go on to become professional journalists. And then 2 months ago, we launched our third program. It's the AMARC Student Journalism Awards, and this is to
Hmm.
support community college student journalists. So we have
Mm.
9 schools participating now and continuing to add more to that. And it's a $5,000 award for a community college student journalist who is active on their student newspaper and has some aspirations to go on to either further education in journalism if they transfer into a 4-year program, or just a career in journalism, because sometimes they leave that 2-year program and immediately go into the workforce and
Right.
start working as reporters. So and that's another one that it's unrestricted money. They can use that however they see fit. We've heard from community college foundations that have said, a flat tire can make a difference in a student staying in the program or dropping out. So
Absolutely.
$5,000 is it's a really impactful amount of money to help these future journalists get this 2-year program and then either go on to more education and training for journalism or just get started working.
Well, and I echo what your feedback on the smallest amounts of money can make a huge difference. We run an internship program where we place students and host newsrooms each summer for paid internships. And for many students, and we really believe in sort of making the pipeline as wide as we can and providing a lot of different pathways into the industry, but so many internships tend to be unpaid. And if you have to make money during the summer, then you're foreclosing all these opportunities. And journalism is one of those industries where you still really need an internship to be able to find your way in the industry. So offering a paid internship we found has been so critical to getting the diversity in outlook, geography, demographics, all the things that we want to be reflective of our communities. Money matters for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've
So,
heard about some programs recently that they've done in Washington and California State. where they actually take young reporters and pair them with local newsrooms that are
Mhm.
under budgeted, undercovered, and helping the communities get out of being a news desert, and then helping these young brand new reporters get the experience they need. So anything like that to help these that transition of getting from wanting to be a journalist to actually being a journalist is something that we're happy to support.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And so wanted to go to your master's scholarships because I noted that Morgan State and American are two of your partner educational institutions. Tell me a little bit about how you chose those fabulous journalism programs, but tell me a little bit about that relationship and how that's worked so far.
Yeah, all of the universities that we have worked with on this have been fantastic. It's really heartening to see how much passion the staff and the professors have for supporting their students, that they see an opportunity to bring in money. The master's program, we don't give any admin fees or anything to the school
Mhm.
for running it. It's just straight money for their students, and they were so happy to take it. And um, very happy to hear about the opportunity and to offer this to their students. So we started out researching all of the universities with master's programs in journalism. We made a list of about 90 that were possible, and
Mhm.
as we've contacted people and gone through them, we've learned that um, not all of them are actually doing master's programs in journalism anymore. There's been a
Mm.
big contraction in higher
Mhm.
education at this level. So the schools that are still doing it are so important. And it became even more clear how important it is to support them and offer this money that they can also use as a recruitment tool and say, hey, if you're able to accept admission here, you have a chance of winning this AMARC scholarship for an additional $10,000. But yeah, the schools were very happy to find, just how much these schools care about providing opportunities for their students to ease that financial burden.
No, and it is unrestricted funds are just critical because if they're in the program, they'll use it for whatever they need to be able to stay in the
Mhm.
program. And so, have you? This was remind me. This was the first year that you started the master's scholarship. So, have those students been selected at
Many
this
of them
point?
have.
Okay.
Most schools at this point, because we are going into the spring semester, they pick someone in the fall. We may have two or three that haven't yet, but most of them have. And the feedback I've gotten as we look at making the second installment for the spring semester, that the students are doing really well. Great
Oh,
feedback
good.
from the professors that they're thriving, and it's really for us a focus on investigative reporting for these master scholarships, that students that are going into some kind of public interest journalism, solutions,
Mhm.
accountability, whether it's data, no matter the medium, but just some form of journalism that helps the public, informs people, and brings things to light that need to be known. Um, and for the community college, we are not as strict. We think that they're a little earlier in their careers for journalism, and we just want them to be um, dedicated to their student outlet, and starting to learn the ropes of working on a newspaper.
Well, I think also in community colleges, you've got, I think, providing the critical thinking skills that are necessary for a journalism career. That helps no matter what uh, organization or what career you ultimately decide to do. But I also feel like there's not as many journalism, quote unquote, journalism programs at community colleges. Are you finding it not difficult, but maybe more selective to locate those programs, or are they kind of hidden under the communications department?
Some of them are, but there are we started research on that as well, and we found somewhere around 150 community colleges with student newspapers. Now,
Okay.
not all of those are active. And
Hmm.
that was one criteria for us in looking at those, that they were publishing regularly. And so students are getting that
Right.
practice and that instruction. Interestingly, about a third of all the community college newspapers we found are in California. It's just a state
Interesting.
that has a really strong culture of community college and acceptance of it as a viable path towards higher education.
Hmm.
Um, the community college newspapers seem to be doing really well. There's really good talent. A lot of them are serving what would otherwise be news deserts and covering
Hmm.
stories that the community otherwise wouldn't get coverage of. And it is really the master's programs that we're seeing. Just in the time we started doing the research, um, places stopped accepting new applications. Like they're shuttering some of these programs. So the ones that are still there are going to be even more important towards training these future journalists.
Absolutely. So now I just want to take a step back. Did you have a journalism background or what drew you to this work? Because you're relatively new at the AMARC Foundation, aren't you?
I've been with AMARC since 2020. Before that, I worked at procon.org. So I have a master's in public policy, but I do have a journalism background. My mom was a journalist growing up. My brother's a journalist. He runs the Catholic Media Association now.
Oh,
And I was a tennis writer for about a decade. I did it
really?
while I was working at Procon. I also was a tennis writer. I loved the sport of tennis and started writing for a tennis magazine and would use that to get press passes and go cover it. I lived in Los Angeles at the time, and we had such a heyday of tennis in LA and the
Hmm.
2005 to 2015 time. We had so many tournaments um, and other types of match like benefits and celebrity matches and things. So I would always go cover those tournaments for the magazine.
That's so fun. And so how wonderful that you can use those skills. And so when you sort of from your experience, what are you really drawing into your work at the foundation? Because you've been in our experience, you've set out the parameters and then said sort of go get them tiger. But in sort of an advisory capacity, I'm sure you're working maybe more deeply with some of the grantees on the work. How is your journalism training kind of coming to bear in that?
Yeah, I think it was helpful to have interview skills and
Mm.
having. I remember the first interview I did. I was actually just working at a tennis tournament as a volunteer driver. So I was driving players from the hotel to the tournament and back. And I had just made contact with this new tennis magazine called Tennis View. And I was saying, I'd really love to write for you. And I happened to drive a player one day um, who was from Pakistan, and he played doubles with a partner from India, and they were known
Mm.
as the Indo-Pak Express because it was like really a sign of peace for their two countries. And
Mhm.
so I was aware of him as a tennis fan, and he consented to be my first interviewee. And so I showed up for my first interview, just having no idea, how to interview someone. I think I asked him, the stupidest questions you could find on Google very easily, and he was so patient and so gracious. And right after I interviewed him and provided this article to the magazine, he went on to the finals at the US Open in men's doubles and mixed doubles,
Oh,
and he just
wow.
kind of exploded. We had this article ready to publish. So that was really how I got into tennis writing and journalism. And he was the best person I could have had for my first interview. And that was really where I learned, how to talk to people, how to
Mhm.
prepare. What do I need to know? What is already public? What do I need to verify? And then what else can I uncover? So that was really helpful in my conversations as I set out to talk to press clubs around the country. And it's been an education the last couple of years. And one thing that has been really interesting is a lot of press clubs and associations face similar challenges, but the media
Mhm.
environment can vary widely around the country. And a lot of that has to
Mhm.
do with, the market makeup. If it's a state with, very one strong urban population versus everything else being rural and kind of how those outlets interact. If it's a state with like California that has so many outlets and then smaller states. So we've had to adjust a little bit for each one. And we didn't want to go in AMARC. We didn't want to go into these states and say, hi, we're here to tell you who your best investigative reporters are. And we're going to tell
Sure.
you, what's the best journalism in your state. We said, you do awards, you know what you're doing, what works in your market and what your people need. These are our goals. These are kind of our parameters. We are, having a big picture outlook of all 50 states and wanting consistency, but not to the exclusion of what works best in one
Mhm.
state or another.
Well, and I also find it so interesting that, in some ways you are this local news expert because it is a lot of work delving into every state, getting to know, like finding the appropriate administrator, getting them on board. when you first contacted me, I was like, is this for real? Like this, I had to do a little research myself to be like, all right, what is this? But did you have any surprises along the way as you kind of worked through, and navigating aside from some of the idiosyncrasies and differences between states?
It's funny. I think a lot of people thought that in the beginning. It's if you got an email offering you money, it's usually too good to be true. And I
Right?
think our first 10 states were probably the hardest. We were lucky that we had the Los Angeles Press Club to kind of give us a reference. And I know a lot of people reached out to them to say, hey, is this, a mark for real? Who are these people? And they very graciously, spoke to people on our behalf. And then SPJ Florida was one of the first to get on board with the expansion, and they were a great megaphone for us. And then SPJ National also kind of helped us reach their members, and then
Hmm.
the press associations. You know, you're all on top of it. You if you see an opportunity, you're like, we're journalists. We're not going to let this go without at least looking into it. So especially
Absolutely.
after we got the first 10, we had the map up showing, we do have these states. And I told my board once the checks started clearing, it got a lot easier that people said, okay, the money's coming
Sure.
in.
Absolutely. Now, do you have in our little world, I keep thinking like, oh, there's so many great opportunities to highlight this journalism, and we have some interesting plans to, you know, um, use our social media channels to highlight the investigative journalism, maybe do some master classes with our winners and things like that. Do you have sort of next step plans once you've established the prize to kind of create more of a, I don't know, synergy or cohort feel amongst the winners?
Yeah, I would love to do that in the future. We are still kind of in our building phase. And
Hmm.
then once we get these 3 programs set, we'll have the opportunity to say, okay, now what more can we do to promote these winners? It's so valuable to do that work after the winners are announced. I'm really happy to hear that you're doing that. Arkansas SPJ and SPJ Indiana both did webinars with their winners and had
Hmm.
them talk about um, the stories that won, what went into that work. And I think that beyond amplifying the actual work that needs to be seen by more people and a wider audience, what it really also does is it hits home how much of themselves they put into this work, especially for really sensitive topics. If you're dealing with victims of abuse, for example,
Hmm.
which is one thing that came up, that it's not easy for them to bear these stories, but they do it to be of service to the victims and to get the word out there about what happened.
No, I find those master classes or sort of the story behind the story so interesting because there is so much goes into it. You're right. So how to draw out a source, how to build trust with maybe a community that does not trust journalists. And journalists go in and talk to people sometimes in the worst day of their lives,
Mhm.
usually not the best. And so the skills that you need as news media changes and there, it's a fact there's just fewer reporters there, that institutional knowledge and sort of, um, helping, sharing information. At the Press Association, we feel really strongly that we have a role there because there's not, the 40-year veteran sitting in the back of the newsroom anymore. I mean, that's just not the reality of how newsrooms operate any longer. So I do feel like where you can encourage fostering some knowledge exchange and some best practices is always a good thing for sure.
Yeah, and that also feeds back into the pipeline. And when I was reaching out to press clubs and press associations about the AMARC prize, a lot of them would say, well, what about students? Can you give us money for students? And that was before we started our scholarship programs. But
Hmm.
it was really amazing to see how much professional journalists recognize the importance of bringing up the next generation of reporters behind them.
Hmm.
So you're right, sharing that knowledge, sharing the tips on how to be persistent, how to get sources to talk to you, how to do this kind of reporting, and then also amplifying the work because, the news cycle moves on so quickly. Some of these
Right.
amazing stories can just get left behind as something more flashy comes in to the zeitgeist. And it's, if you go back and say, okay, let's talk more deeply about the story that you did, why it mattered, what it changed, and how you got that story. So it just kind of feeds in, a positive feedback loop and getting more reporters into investigative reporting, teach them how to do it, getting these stories to matter, getting the public to be aware of the work that's being done.
Hmm. Well, and I also find so for Sunshine Week, we'll often highlight the nominees in our investigative reporting categories. And even though the work that we're highlighting is, and we offer opportunities for fresher work to be out there as well, but we already have the investigative work that was entered into the contest. Oftentimes, those stories are not sort of on the shelf, they're active stories with follow ups because the investigation has brought something out. There's
Hmm.
legislation, there's a change, there's follow up. And so I do think that they become these dynamic, really large pieces. And it starts with something a lot smaller, a more straightforward story.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the AMARC Prize winners were multi-part pieces. There were follow-ups and follow-ups throughout the year, and then even going beyond the contest entry period, that they keep digging into these stories. And I think sometimes I've heard some feedback that once a story got published and um, won an award and got some notice, that then more tips started coming in, and they can even uncover even more.
Absolutely, because people want to know what's going on in their communities.
Hmm.
So I feel like this is a really I'm so excited to have this kind of support for journalism. I think it's a really interesting time with people kind of coming in a lot of different areas. You have organizations like the Reporters Committee providing free legal advice to journalists. You've got economic and visibility support through places like the AMARC Foundation, and a recognition that journalists are really sort of being more supportive. So, like the Dart Center's Journalist Trauma Network, we're coming together in a lot of different ways, and I think remaking what journalism can do and be. So thank you so much for that. I would direct people to your website, which is the letter A, so amarkfoundation.org.
Right.
So if you're not in Maryland, Delaware, or DC, and you've happened to publish somewhere else, you can go to the website and see the 42 jurisdictions that have an AMARC prize. And I'm sure there will be more coming in because you are very good at what you do and hunting down people. So you can apply for an investigative reporting prize and see where the scholarships and journalism awards are. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners while we're here?
No, just, thanks for the opportunity to talk about the prize and kind of spread the word. I've heard that it can take up to 3 years for a new award to gain traction. So we were really pleasantly surprised by how well it went this year, and just look forward to it growing, more awareness about it. And we're very, very happy to bring you on board next year and have, 3 new prizes coming.
Yes, we are excited too. So thank you so much. We'll have you back maybe when we do our tour de force of the winners of the AMARC prize.
Yeah,
So
that'd be
thank you
great.
for your commitment. Thanks for listening to 5 Dubs with Rebecca Snyder. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts so that others can find us. What do you want to know about local journalism? Email me at rsnyder, SNYDER, at mddcpress.com. Interested in supporting our podcast and journalism? Please donate to our 501c3 Press Foundation. Find out more and see the full episode list and show notes at www.5-dubs.com.